Hello, so we're here with my team partner, Fatma Sami, and we're going to be conducting an interview with a psychologist whose name is Rusham Zahra. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. All right.
All right, so we're going to start off with a couple of questions in relation to our topic that we chose. Do you believe people have children to save their marriage, and how does that impact the relationship ultimately?
I mean, yes, they do. Lots of people have their different. First, we need to understand that there are different kinds of marriages. And so, when we're talking about this specific kind of marriage, that's the only kind that we're talking about. We're not talking about marriages in general. We're not talking about everybody's marriage. We're talking about this specific case, which is where a person will get married for a particular reason or want to have children for a particular reason. It's usually when, from what I can see or what I have noticed in my practice or generally in society, is that when people are struggling in a marriage, they need a hope. They need something that will give them some hope that something is going to get better, that something is going to work out for them. And that hope sometimes comes in the form of a child. It could be any kind of life change. It could be any kind of life milestone. Usually it's a child because it's the one that you can technically most control or have immediately, for example. So people tend to have children in the hopes that it would help with the marriage, and that's what people around them tell them as well, because then what technically is happening is their focus is not so much on their own issues or their own problems. They become distracted with something else. They get distracted with something that brings joy and is so full time that they don't have any time left to think about their own problems or their own issues. So yes, that does happen. What was the second part of the question?
And how does that impact the relationship ultimately?
Well, it can affect the relationship in a bunch of ways.
Okay, do you think this is like a healthy mindset to have all together?
To have children to save their marriage?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a mindset. It is something that has happened time and time again, and it is something that will continue to happen. It works a lot of the times and it doesn't work a lot of the times. So it is something that it's one of those old wives' tales that people will either do or not do, and it has different effects. You can't say it's not going to work, because sometimes it does, but you can't say it does always work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So it depends on that particular situation. How it works usually is that when a person has a child, they get distracted, so it works in that sense. They then invest all of their love, all of that energy, all of that attention into that child. So for a woman, if we're looking from a woman's perspective, the person who gives birth, her energy is then shifted all into this one thing that she's created. So she's very, very attached. Then her world is shifted towards that baby, and she no longer cares or thinks about her husband as an issue or a problem. Then the husband is just a provider and comes and goes, and that's fine. You can do what you want as long as I have my kid. I have my sense of security. And that's why there's so much emphasis on a societal level to have a son, because the son will bring you security. The son will stay with you. The son will take care of you. The son will protect you. All of those things that you expect your husband to do and is not doing. And this is again speaking in terms of people who are having babies to save their marriages.
But again, do you think that it's healthy to fix your marriage with a child? Because you're bringing the child into an already unhappy couple, right?
Again, it doesn't have to be bad.
Okay.
Sometimes it works out great, because then that child is getting a lot of affection from two people who don't have any affection towards themselves but have a lot of affection for themselves, for that child. So sometimes it works, sometimes it is a disaster because their marriage is already in turmoil, and then they bring a child into the mix, which is so hard on a relationship in any case. So when they bring a child into that, it creates more of a mess. And then what happens is they want to break up, they want to split apart, but they stay for the child. Which is counterintuitive, because the thing that they're staying for, they're ruining because of the unhealthy marriage that they're in.
All right.
Zahra, would you like to ask?
Yes, I would. So we do understand that miscarriages can be an extremely traumatic event that happens in a person's life. Have you ever dealt with patients who've had a miscarriage?
Yeah, all the time.
How would you say they've been affected?
So they've been affected in two ways that I have seen. They've been affected, either they don't they've taken it in stride, and they've had rainbow babies right afterwards, which is what we call a baby right after a miscarriage, when a baby is born. And it really, really helps in that case, where they feel less distressed than sometimes, because they've now had a baby, so it's fine. In the other case, it's then there's 3 cases. So in the other case, they have a baby right after the miscarriage, but they never forget the loss of the first one.
Yeah.
And so they're pushed forward to move on and avoid the grief, but then it eventually blows up later on. So they experience trauma later, and they experience PTSD later. In the third case, it's terrible. They cannot move on. They cannot have any more babies. They just are done. Sometimes, because of the stress of the first miscarriage, they're more likely to have other miscarriages. So one miscarriage increases the chance of other miscarriages. So because of the stress, because of all the other things that come with it, because of the initial physical problems that the person has, which has caused the miscarriage in the first place. So to sum, with miscarriages, you will either have a miscarriage, be distressed, then have a baby and be okay. You will have a miscarriage, be distressed, have a baby and still be distressed and never forget. And C, you could have a miscarriage, be so distressed that you would not have any more babies and just continue to be barren, basically.
All right. And what would you say about the effect whenever somebody loses a child, as let's say a mother loses a child, what effect do you think it would have on the father? That mother's state. Like, there are states where you become extremely depressed, or you have trauma.
What effect does the miscarriages effect on the mother have on the father, or the miscarriages effect on the father?
The mother's effect on the father. How
so
do you
the
think
way that mother is behaving.
Yeah. Would that like deteriorate a marriage? What do you say?
Would it strain the relationship?
It would strain the relationship. It could also bring them together, but it could also strain, because usually what happens is, because the father sometimes is not as attached, because he's not the vessel for the baby, right? He's not carrying the baby. So when he loses the baby,
it's not physically traumatic.
It's not physically traumatic. It is traumatic, but it is not physically traumatic. So he is able to move on in most cases faster than the woman who has gone through a physical ordeal. So miscarriage is not just poof, the baby is gone, and your stomach shrinks back. It's a whole ordeal where they have to take out the baby. You bleed for days. Your body goes through changes. You have hormonal changes. You become depressed. You can sometimes become suicidal. You don't want to do that again. And then there's that husband who's thinking, I've not had that effect, so why aren't you moving on? I moved on. I have had also a loss, but I moved on, so should you. So that kind of causes a strain where the woman may think that the husband just doesn't understand the level of trauma that she's gone through and has moved on faster, and everybody's kind of moved on faster than everybody else.
All right. So how can we bridge this communication gap between the two partners when something so traumatic happens?
You can give information to the husband about what the woman is going through, unless someone experiences it themselves, it's very hard for them to understand. But in our society, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind closed doors that you just are not supposed to, quote unquote, tell the husband, if you're bleeding or something, or so the women are taking care of that aspect and the husband is not involved.
Specifically in Pakistan? Or?
Specifically in South Asian cultures, where periods and things like that, blood and miscarriages, this is a woman's thing. Even if you go into a maternity ward, men are not allowed in the maternity ward. In a gynecology department, men are not allowed to enter the gynecology department. It just shows you how little involvement they expect from the husband, and how they don't want a man to be involved in those things.
Would you say there's a disconnect to begin with?
Yeah, there's a disconnect to begin with, and I've seen that time and time again. And even personally, when I would look at it, I thought about that as well. If you're not going to let the husband in while she's giving birth, or while she's in labor, or what process, he's just going to think it's something that every woman goes through. So therefore, by default, it's something that's really easy. Just because multiple people go through it does not make it easy. It's a difficult thing. It is a physically traumatic experience that everybody goes through, and it is traumatic for a lot of women, most women. And even if it's not traumatic, it's still painful. So, and that's why so many women go through post-traumatic depression or post-traumatic psychosis, or even blues that we call postpartum blues, where it's just general sadness of the whole experience, because there's so many hormones that a woman is having to go throughout that whole pregnancy period. So a man is from the get-go disconnected, and so if he's kept on the side, he doesn't get to understand. So A would be to kind of involve him in the whole process so he gets to see. And I've seen that in my practice, seen it, and you can see it on television as well nowadays. In social media, they kind of show that now, is when they see what the woman is going through, they are able to empathize more. And it just makes sense. Unless you are aware of what's going on, you won't be able to empathize with someone just blindly. Just because she has said doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to believe it. She says she's in pain unless they show it. So you must have seen videos, etc., where they've simulated period pains or simulated pregnancy contractions, and it's then that the man then suddenly starts to think, wow, this is something that is really painful. I mean, you've been saying that to them for ages, but it was only when they experienced it themselves that they decided that it is painful. So it's something that you need to communicate. They need to be part of the process. They need to be seeing all of those things, and they need to be communicated to. Men need to be told actually anybody needs to be told, but men specifically need to be told, this is exactly what I'm going through, this is what I need from you. And when you are saying these things, A, B, C, whatever you're saying, how is it not helping me, and what will? So if you give them these instructions, sometimes women go through these stages of, obviously they're also feeling very hormonal, is he should just know.
Right.
Well, if he doesn't know, might as well tell him, because him not knowing and you being in that state of he should know is just tearing you apart.
Strain it even more.
It's training it even more, and then you develop a passive aggression towards your husband because he resentment, and because he doesn't understand and you expect him to, and he on the other hand doesn't understand why you're going through this, and he will counter to, oh, she's going through something, she'll just get over it after a while.
Do you think communication comes with a privilege? Like, you understand that you can communicate these things to your partner and he would be receptive, but certain people might not have that privilege.
I don't know if I would call it privilege. I think it's a skill.
Okay.
If you are able to communicate well to your husband, and that husband is able to take that communication and understand it, it's great. It's a skill that really helps. But I wouldn't call it a privilege. It is an advantage of having communication that works, where an effective communication is where the sender sends out a message, the receiver receives that message and provides feedback. That is effective communication. So when we're saying communication helps, we mean effective communication helps. It's not just a woman kind of just saying, this is what's wrong, this is what you're doing wrong, etc., and the husband not perceiving it or just taking it in stride and thinking she's going to be fine, let's have another one, so she feels less loss.
Coming towards the end of the interview, I wanted to ask a question specifically in regards to media. So film can be seen as the art of storytelling. Do you think there are enough stories worldwide that cover this? For instance, in a Western point of view that dominates the media, like Hollywood films or UK-based films. And do you think there's enough representation in Pakistani media? Like, there are dramas that happen and they show all of this in a very hyper-exaggerated form. Maybe they kind of degrade the woman in the process and everything.
Romanticize their pain.
Yeah. So what would you say in terms of representation from a foreign perspective and specifically from a Pakistani perspective?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot more representation when it comes to foreign media in terms of miscarriages or in terms of loss or marriages or what a baby does to a marriage, etc. There are a few movies, at least I've seen, and I'm sure there are way more, especially in different foreign languages. If I'm currently just speaking about English films, but there are other languages where people are showing this, I'm sure. And it's those kinds of social issue films that are then, selected for, contests and prizes and galas and all of those things. So they are working. How many people see those films is also different. So it's not that they're not being made, it's that they're not being seen as well. No one is interested. No one wants to go and see a movie about a miscarriage. That's not something that people want to go to a cinema for. I mean, personally, if I have to think about it, I don't want to go to a cinema to watch, someone going through a really painful process unless there's something happy at the end, because I'm trying to go to a movie to escape reality, not to be part of it. And that's a personal preference. But a lot of people have that preference. So a lot of people won't go to see those movies, and it's that kind of thing that discourages filmmakers from making those movies. So you can either be brave, pick a social issue, go with it. If it clicks, then people will watch it and then think, right, yeah, it really, really resonates with me, and it will become a hit. And you see that in Bollywood a lot, you know, with movies where if the social issue clicks with someone, then it's a huge hit.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't click with someone, then it's not, and it's just a hit or miss kind of thing. So filmmakers are then very, very aware of that and then make movies accordingly. So yes, representation is based on those kinds of decisions. In Pakistan, I think there's a lot of taboo as well. There's a lot of censorship. So that kind of also discourages filmmakers from talking about things like miscarriage or talking about things, because then a religious aspect comes to it, and a religious aspect to marriages and miscarriages and babies and all of that come into the mix. So it is difficult to navigate that in Pakistani cinema. Even if a filmmaker goes through that whole process of, right, this is the issue, I want to talk about it, let's do it, Pakistani public may not be as receptive as a foreign public to that concept.
That is pretty interesting. Well, any other questions?
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
This was really nice.
It was super helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.